In 1971, Richard Nixon wanted to make a major move against communist strongholds in Laos. The plan was codenamed Lam Son 719, in honor of the birthplace of Le Loi, a Vietnamese nationalist who repelled the Chinese invaders in 1428. The objective was to disrupt an ongoing North Vietnamese army supply buildup at Zapon, Laos. While the ground troops, including armored units, were to be all from the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or ARVN, the United States provided air support through fighter bombers and helicopter gunships. The greatest enemy to success of the operation was the South Vietnamese Army itself. Thoroughly infiltrated with communist spies at all levels, many senior leaders and their critical planning staffs were not informed of the mission or its goals until a few weeks or even days before moving to jump-off locations in order to prevent the traitors and spies from passing on the secrets of the mission to their counterparts in the North. As a result, most units were hastily moved to the border and thrust out of the country into maneuver combat with little or no preparation. In addition, the stifling political rifts between many senior military and political leaders involved prevented crucial cooperation between those who could ensure success. As a result, commanders and formations were confused and depended heavily upon support from the Western Allies at a time when the war effort was to be increasingly assumed by the forces of South Vietnam. While the early phases of Lam Son 719 seemed to go well, the North Vietnamese Army waited deep in Laos in ambush, utterly defeating the troops of the South, destroying or capturing dozens of artillery pieces, tanks, and hundreds of helicopters with newly supplied Soviet wire-guided or heat-seeking missiles. The efforts of the Allies to build up the weapons, formations, and leadership of the South Vietnamese military were destroyed in a few weeks of confusion and betrayal inside Laos. Many of the best leaders and units of the South were decimated at a time when they were most needed to take over the war. American political considerations and the resulting calendar of withdrawal meant that the disaster would ultimately be a death blow to the efforts of the South to resist communist advances on their own. From this operation until the end of the war, the South Vietnamese government retreated all the way back to the presidential palace in Saigon in 1975.
I went into 101st, I went in recon. First of the 501st, that's who I was with, recon.
The battle plan for Lam Son 719 involved an attack by the Airborne Division and the 1st Armored Brigade along Highway 9 to Alui and then on to Zapon, where Highway 9 intersected the Ho Chi Minh Trail. 22 miles inside Laos, Zapon was a major enemy communications and supply hub. The highway was to be kept open as the main supply route. The 1st Infantry Division was to attack on a parallel axis to the main attack along the high ground south of the Zapon River and protect the southern flank of the Airborne Division. The Ranger Group would establish fire bases north of the highway and protect the right flank. A Marine Brigade would remain in reserve near Khe Son. Lam Son 719 got underway on February 8, 1971.
It was supposedly all ARVN, the Vietnamese army was going to do it, but the 101st was with them. A few other divisions, I'm not quite sure exactly. Like I said, I didn't know much more than what we had to do at the time.
The operation began as planned, with the 1st Armored Brigade Task Force advancing 9 kilometers along Highway 9 on the first day, and with 3 battalions of the 1st Infantry Division air assaulting south of the highway, and 2 battalions of the Airborne Division assaulting to the north. By February 25th, the invading forces had discovered enemy supply bases 1 and 2 kilometers square and had cut a major POL pipeline. However, the tide was beginning to turn, and enemy infantry supported by tanks overran Fire Base 31, capturing 120 South Vietnamese, including the battalion commander. With 3 enemy divisions pressuring them, the Rangers began to withdraw from their fire bases. Unable to continue the advance along Highway 9, General Lamb decided to use his air mobile assets to launch an air assault on Zappone, and on March 6th, 120 Hueys lifted 2 ARVN infantry battalions into the town, capturing it against light enemy resistance. The enemy reacted aggressively, rushing reinforcements to the area, including tanks. The U.S. Army Cobras tried to halt the enemy armor and had some success sweeping the accompanying infantry from the tanks using 2.75-inch flechette rockets. But the usual high-explosive rockets had only limited success in stopping the tanks. Even when high-explosive anti-tank rockets were available, the results were mixed. In order to score a direct hit, the rocket had to be fired from a distance of 500 to 1,000 meters, which brought the Cobras into the range of the tank's machine guns and the enemy infantry in the area. A dedicated tank-busting helicopter was sorely needed. The U.S. helicopter crewmen went against the heaviest anti-aircraft barrage incurred in the war. Soon enemy pressure bogged down the ARVN advance. Poor weather and heavy air defense opposition began to limit the air support available to relieve the pressure. The offensive was halted before reaching its first objective. The stalled troops were pounded again and again by the NVA and Cong forces. Soon they began to withdraw. The ARVN retreat became a rout, and the rout became panic. U.S. commanders tried to save the day by calling in the cavalry, and A Troop got its orders.
They flew us out there, and we were setting up on the Quezon Plains out there, where the old base had been. I can't remember really seeing many maps or anything. I can remember getting sent out there. They dropped us off kind of by ourselves, just a gaggle of us, and got on the radio trying to figure out where I was supposed to go, contact somebody, and they said we're over here to the west or something like that. So, you know, we just started off in that direction.
But for Lieutenant Wagner, the day was cut short.
And the next thing I know, there's an explosion, and one of my guys was laying on the ground. And we're not quite sure exactly at that point really what had happened. So Doc, our medic, he starts to go to the guy, and all of a sudden there's an explosion, he's down. At that point, you know, we're in a minefield. So I told everybody to stay where they were. I had the morphine in my pocket because that's kind of what you did then. And so I took my bayonet out and I started to probe to work my way over to Doc and to DeMarco was the name of the first guy who was hurt. And I don't remember getting very far. And I don't know if I was on a pressure release or what, but the next thing I knew, I was on the ground too. And you know, I looked back, I could see my foot was all blown apart. And I felt a real sticky feeling between my legs because I'd gotten wounded there too. And at first you just don't know anything, you know, what's going on. You're just kind of stunned. And then eventually you start getting kind of shocky, you know, and start shivering and stuff. And then a medevac helicopter came, and these guys came down on a sling. And I can remember telling them, don't stand down, don't step down here, don't step down here. And this guy, I don't know if he could see from up there or what, or he was just the bravest guy I've ever seen. He, you know, put a sling around me, and up I went.
Once on board the medevac, Wagner had one concern.
I was on a helicopter, and I kept asking, well, frankly, if my balls been blown off, because that's what I was worried about, because I knew they made plastic feet. And I was only about 23, and I had just other things I intended to do with my life. And I don't remember, I remember getting back, and then there was a succession of back hospitals I went to. I was stabilized. I'm sure I was at Quang Tri for a little while. And I went someplace else. And then I ended up in Japan, where they kept people, I think, to stabilize them until I flew them back. The doctor would come to me, change dressing, say, we're going to number 10 foot, we'll have to cut it off when you get back to the United States. And flew back on a C-141, I think, all loaded with litters.
With overall enemy pressure increasing and the weather worsening, the problem now was how to withdraw while still in contact with the enemy. It proved impossible to keep the highway open and secure. So many of the ARVN units were withdrawn by helicopter and often under fire. Panic occasionally set in, and some helicopter crews resorted to greasing the skids of their Hueys to prevent ARVN troops clinging to them during the evacuation process. The last elements of the 1st Infantry Division were extracted on March 21st, and the rest of the invasion force a few days later. Thousands of tons of ammunition, supplies, and POL had been destroyed by the ARVN units and U.S. TAC air and B-52 strikes.